It's smelly water. Oh, my donuts, some shift nut ifnal in the bag. Quite nice, these donuts. Got a smiley face on them too. Must be some bad donuts. Anyway, we're looking at this blast that called Britain to stop selling aid to Israel. Will America do the same in Australia? Stop selling aid to Israel? Let's see.
But first, Rishi Sunak is facing mounting pressure to ban arms exports to Israel after 7 aid workers, including 3 Brits, were killed in an airstrike earlier this week. John Chapman, James Kirby and James Henderson lost their lives along with 4 other aid workers.
Flying remote control.
Israeli drone in
remote
Gaza.
control. This is
British
Netflix
arms
on
sales
it.
to Israel mounted to
Toshiba.
about 42
In a Toshiba, in a Jiba.
in
Toshiba remote.
2022. The last year data was available.
Bit of a house on the remote controller, see?
In comparison to the likes of the United States, even Germany
Home of my
and
controller.
Italy.
House.
As international pressure grows, the former head of MI6 deemed Israel's military action as bordering on reckless, claiming it fundamentally undermines the objective of sustaining some moral high ground. Adding to the outcry, 3 former Supreme Court justices, along with 600 lawyers and academics, warned that the British government that it's breaching international law by continuing to arm Israel. But former Home Secretary Suella Braverman described any such suggestion as an insult. Every game.
How was it an insult they killed our British people? Why should we sell them arms, guns and weapons?
Not. The suggestion itself is absurd and frankly an insult to Israel, who's been going above and beyond the necessary requirements to ensure
they've killed our people and we're selling them weapons. We could be doing that in the first place.
Aid is received onto the Gaza Strip and distributed. I've seen evidence myself in terms of very up-to-date plentiful food packages and trucks.
I've seen it all before now.
Food, water and medicines getting to the people.
I've seen it all today.
And speaking on Talk TV earlier, the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Wallace Simmons, echoed her views.
Israel has gone to
views as well
that no other country has gone to in terms of protecting civilian lives, including dropping millions of leaflets, making millions of...
We helped Israel and they do this to us.
Combat zones,
British people, Australian, Canadian people. I don't know about Americans that are dropping stuff off.
And as a result, has protected many, many civilian lives.
I mean, there are a couple of points, or there's many points surrounding this issue. I'm really not sure where the lawyers and academics got their advice from in terms of it's breaching international law. I'm really not sure what that's based on. That could only be based on another assumption about what Israel are doing and how you would describe or define or articulate what they're doing. So I think that's kind of flawed, and Braverman is probably right on that. I think the point, Isabel, as well, about the amount of money. I mean, okay, there's tens of millions.
Doesn't work this anymore, the batteries have gone.
That are going to Israel. So in terms of an outcry over the United Kingdom and arms, I'm really not sure whether the debate has even got to that level yet, other than from some understandable agitated voices who want to advance.
I mean, it's certainly rapidly going there. There's been a huge amount of support for that that group of lawyers' letter, as you'd expect there to be, because we've seen the overwhelming support for the people of Palestine from these marches every week. So it doesn't surprise me that lots of people are jumping on this bandwagon. But to put the money in perspective, it's something like 42 million, I think you said. That's 0.02% of Israel's total budget on arms. So Germany contributes about 28% of Israel's military spending budget in that regard. So we are an absolutely infinitesimal fraction. And I don't think it would be the right reaction to suddenly upend our defence relationship with Israel over the awful things that have happened.
Hope for the heroes band, people. This glows in the dark as well.
Is
Poppy.
A point to be made about Israel's
usually wear these in October, but
to collateral and the extent to which they are they have become over casual about proportions and ratios. And there's some really interesting information coming out from an investigation I think by an Israeli-based journalist about the use of AI for targeting and the extent to which this very clumsy software is being used to target individuals who may have unbelievably tenuous links to anybody who's involved in any kind of combatant way. And the suggestion that in the case of very low-level so-called targets, up to 20
news time
considered an acceptable level of collateral damage, or to the extent of a high-level target up to 300. I thought that was fascinating. The detail about how they targeted it seems so blunt, and I think the problem here is that Israel is very rapidly running out of the moral high ground.
Well, I think that's a good point to make, but also I think if you're looking at moral high grounds and where people are going with this, the fact that we've got a very small amount of money being spent in the UK on arms demonstrates how politicised and how charged this has become, that lawyers believe that they should be sending such letters, that they should be undermining international relationships and not trusting our government to actually get on and deal with it. I want the pressure, as far as I'm concerned, should be to make sure that Israel is accountable. Now, if Israel had said, no, that's absolutely what we intended to do and we're not going to investigate, then fine, I understand that argument. But they haven't said that. They have said this is a mistake. They need to be pressured to make sure that we get the answers of that investigation and to ensure that, as you say, there is not a casual attitude to deaths that are part of the collateral of this, and also that we are able to understand their direction of travel. But I think this has become politically charged in this country because we've now seen the likes of Corbyn or otherwise pushing for this, and there are certain people who are and have been pushing for an arms embargo to Israel on a point of politics for some while.
I don't think the amount of money that we make from the arms makes a difference, to be honest. I don't care if America that main suppliers. Every country is individual. If we only give them £1 and the people of this country say that's too much, then it should stop, because that's the will of the people. Israel have said from the very beginning, this is what they intend to do. They're not saying it now, they're saying this was a mistake, but at the very start, on October 9th, 2 days after the massacre, they had said they will obliterate, they will stop food, they will stop electricity, they will make a siege, and they will, essentially, they're doing what they said 2 days after the assault. However, I agree with Isabel, we shouldn't be stopping selling weapons to Israel because we sell weapons to lots of countries. Saudi Arabia bombed the hell out of Yemen. They're with our weapons. China, who this government makes out to be the big bogeyman, we supply them with weapons. We supply weapons to 22 countries who are on our own human rights watch list. So it's completely hypocritical for the UK to say, Israel, stop what you're doing. You've got to do less of it, and then we're still going to give them weapons continuously. But this is the business, unfortunately, and it's war.
And is it based on anything, though? I mean, I said at the beginning there that I understand it, as Isabel said, that lots of people want to sign a letter, etc. But I'm just not sure what they talk about. It could be breaching international law. I think what they're saying there, it would only be breaching international law if you could define what Israel are doing as a genocide.
Yeah, and the problem, of course, is that daily, October the 7th, and the atrocity that actually kicked all this off is receding into the background, and it's being refreshed every day by, for example, the appalling deaths of these aid workers. That's fresher than what happened now, nearly 5 months ago. So that is, 6 months ago. So that is continually, people are...
Thank you for that comment. You're very intelligent.
All of that. That is what's on at the top of people's minds.
Always helps the comment.
We have a situation now where we have 30,000 dead. It's estimated about 10,000 of those are perhaps Hamas. But for me, that's not a good equation. So 2 lives gone for one military person. I don't think that's a good equation. And then when for counter fact, Britain is now riled because we've lost 3 British people working for.
Of course, we're going to be riled. We lost our British people. Yeah, of course.
Other aid workers have died since the start of this conflict.
I thought that's a sort of quite an obvious statement, but I also thought it.
The world just gets worse
now because there's a few people with EU and UK passports.
Yeah.
This is just a tiny.
See what else is on the TV.
This is what gets the world.
I think VAT. Some VAT vans or something. Car vans are VAT.
Now, Britain's automotive industry is going from strength to strength, with new car registrations recording their 20th consecutive month of growth. That's according to the new figures from the Society of Motor Manufacturer and Traders. But it's not great news for electric vehicles or EVs, as you can see on your screens there, because demand has fallen for them last month. The average buyer saying they're put off by high prices, recharge times, and
VAT for vehicles.
Well, joining now, GB News'
electric cars,
business
petrol
editor,
vehicles.
Liam Halligan in our Westminster studio. Just got a bit of a mouthful there. Now, Liam, you've been saying for many moons, you've seen this going, like most things, you call it right. The will is there, the virtue signal is there, but the demand simply doesn't match it.
Running out for the
EVs
charge.
In the future. I don't think the technology's there yet, and I think, you know, shrewd buyers, ordinary British men and women, sense this, and so why should the second biggest thing that they ever buy in their lives, their car, be something that they don't actually want to buy? And we're seeing that in these numbers. Let's just get that graph back up on the screen, Martin, because it needs just a little bit of explanation, if I may. You'll see there that this is the demand over the last year for diesel cars. That's actually down by about 5%, as you'd expect. But you see there, that second bar, battery electric, that's EVs. That's up just over 5%, whereas actual car demand overall is up 10%. So EV demand is going up less than car demand as a whole, which means that market
plug-in
share is
hybrid,
falling, even though they're meant to be the future.
electric vehicles.
Plug-in hybrid, they're the big winners. What's a plug-in hybrid? That's a car with an internal combustion engine that you can also plug in. So you don't have that range anxiety. So you get the undoubted benefits of cheaper motoring because you can plug in, but you don't get the range anxiety.
That's what she says.
You can still use petrol or diesel in your
plug
car.
in.
Going for plug-in hybrids.
We could have a joke about that.
Look,
thank you very much, Rockstar.
That I don't think that technology is there for EV vehicles. That they may mean we're too reliant on so-called rare earths from countries like China and parts of Africa. All the copper you need in an electric vehicle, the sheer weight of an electric vehicle, the fact that all the batteries are made in China, the kind of geopolitical dangers of that. And listen up, pin back your ears. This is Carlo Tavares. He's the head of the car-making giant Stellantis, one of the biggest car makers in the world. I was up on Stellantis' factory on Ellesmere Port there, up in the northwest of England quite recently. Stellantis' brands include Vauxhall, Peugeot, Fiat. They really are a super brand. And this is Carlo Tavares on EVs, warning EVs, electric vehicles are likely to ever be universally popular drivers. And this is a bloke, you know, one of the leading EV car makers in the world. They make more EV vans than any other company in Britain. And this is what he said.
Phones off. Phones on. Phones off. Phones on.
Says Carlos.
Charging on. Phone off.
The head of Stellantis.
Phones
off.
I
don't think this is going to work. Repeat, I don't think this is going to work. What I would like to add is that the current EVs can be a solution for some of our societies. Mr. Tavares is saying that the 500 kilograms, half a metric ton of raw materials you need to produce an EV battery, quotes, isn't sustainable. A technological breakthrough is required to half the weight of battery packs over the next decade. That's what myself and some other sages in the pub have been saying for 2 years.
Yeah, astonishing stuff. And all the extra weight, of course, adds the biggest pollutant to the air, particularly tyres. I digress. When will reality bite for the policymakers? Because they're going to ban diesel and petrol cars in 2035, or so they maintain. If the guy that makes them saying that's going to work, when are they going to wake up and smell the coffee?
I think what Carlos Tavares is saying is that EVs aren't the sort of
if they want to ban more diesel and petrol cars, they need to make sure there's a lot of electric ports for electric vehicles.
They are so much of the
because that would be annoying if it was in a war zone. Electric vehicle runs out. Where are you going to deliver the guns?
It doesn't work like that.
Sorry, my car broke down. It's electric. It's not petrol no more.
All the car technologists in the world, what they may be thinking in 3 years' time, they just don't know better. It's just arrogant to convince
saving the money,
make other people by law,
saving the planet.
We have seen a little bit of reality coming into this debate. The UK, for instance, it was going to be 2030.
How are we going to save the money in the planet with electric vehicles? Next flying electric cars? I mean,
it's now 2035. Of course, shock horror. My God, we're giving up our commitment to net zero. No, we're not. We're just going to where the rest of the EU is, actually. So I don't think that was a particularly retrograde step. As I say, I do think EVs are part of the solution, but they are just part of the solution. I don't think, personally,
I find TV very boring these days.
That's why.
That's why I do my own entertainment and my own fun.
Basically demanding that the government
Do my own games and entertain other people. They must think I'm interesting. They probably do anyway. That's good. I like to be interesting.
In the northeast of England,
original,
not
limited edition.
Gigafactories hooked up to the national grid. It's near a deep water port, which Bley is, and nobody wants to buy the site because they're not convinced, even with government funding, that the market is actually there yet. So it'd be really good
bloody
if
markets,
politicians passed laws that actually reflected technological reality, rather than passing laws that make them heroes within their own dinner parties.
And quickly, Liam, of course, all this electricity
quickly.
is not powered by unicorns on treadmills anyway, is it? It's power stations that burn gas.
You know the novelist Lionel Shriver, not the sort of person you'd think of as a technology writer. Lionel Shriver, she's American, of course. She wrote an absolutely
unicorn and treadmills.
It's one of those pieces that only a non-specialist can write. She says, "Hey, guess what? If we're going to have lots of electric cars, we need lots more electricity." And
no way!
It's true that
we need more electricity.
In the UK, it's in the US as well. Even in the US, the national grid cannot keep up with the electric vehicle.
Too many people on this planet. I'm having a headache now.
And even the technology behind the electric vehicle revolution can't keep up with the electric vehicle revolution. Again, I'm not some kind of Cassandra about this. I do think EVs are part of the solution. I'm not instinctively anti moving away from petrol and diesel cars if the technology's there. You can see that in these sales figures from no other, the most authoritative source in the UK, the SMMT, the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, and you can hear it in the very words of Carlos Tavares, who I say is the head of the car-making giant Stellantis, incorporating Vauxhall, Peugeot and Fiat. He is saying EVs, are they really the whole solution? I'm not so sure. I paraphrase Martin, but not a lot.
Superb. Liam Hannigan, always electrifying. Thanks for joining me in the studio here.
So what else is on this TV? As they tell me now.
Joining me now is independent travel editor and guru Simon.
Oh, what do you know?
Actually on a train, I see.
Yes, I am on a train. Very nice to talk
on a train.
On a train which isn't actually going anywhere at the moment due to a range of problems. Of course, industrial action by drivers belonging to the ASLEF union began today, but the problem right here, somewhere in beautiful Northumberland, appears to be a broken down freight train. So anyway, anybody, of course, who's got a rail ticket needs to treat it as something of a raffle ticket these days, what with strikes and everything else. But I'm very happy to talk about, yes, those pesky liquids rules as well.
Yes, so Simon, this was something that we were all so excited about, and I hate to be sexist about it, but I think us women were particularly excited about it because we're the ones that tend to have bags full of toiletries and makeup, and you're going through it trying to get it down to the smallest possible amount so you can get your hand luggage through the machines without having everything confiscated.
Thank you, Rockstar.
And then we were told that that was going to be a thing of the past, but apparently they were just teasing us with that promise.
Yes, well, let me talk you through the entire history of this. It was August the 10th.
Please, talk us through the history of the world.
We all woke up.
Speak the world. Speak the mind of the world now.
From flights. That was because a plot had been uncovered to actually take liquids on board aircraft and improvise explosive devices. Once that was discovered, they brought in a no liquids rule, and a few months after that, they said, okay, you can do liquids, but that has to be just like this. And that was supposed to be a temporary measure. Unfortunately, it's been in place, and that means every day thousands of bottles of water and anything up to very expensive beauty products are being confiscated. As you say, we were hoping that the new technology was going to transform the experience for people, but that Prime Minister Boris Johnson promised in 2019 it would be all clear with new scanners in 2022.
I've got a broken pen here.
In 2022,
pen's broken.
Promised June 24, so that it would be
in
summer's peak season. Now that's been put off by another year. However, there are some airports, Newcastle, Teesside, London City Airport, where you can use the new scanners, you're guaranteed to, and on top of that, you've got.
I got batteries in my controller as well.
Who are working on it and think they will be compliant in time.
I'm putting some new ones in.
So Simon, you mentioned Boris Johnson there, and it sounded like yet another broken promise from a politician. But whose fault is it? Is it the chief executives of these particular airports? Who's responsible for the fact that they haven't got this up and running in time?
Well, look, the airports say to me, this is incredibly difficult. Not only is it difficult to buy these very expensive bits of kit, but we also...
I've been watching a lot of this today too.
We've got to train people on them.
Equalizer.
While we're trying to run
Denzel Washington.
Security operation in incredible
train tracks.
Strange spaces.
Training day.
So they say nothing to do with us, and Heathrow says
he makes more films as well.
46 channels to get to work, and furthermore, our buildings weren't constructed expecting this sort of way, so we've got to strengthen the floors as well.
Oh wow! I'm hoping that very long announcement on your train means that your train will be moving at some point. Funnily enough, I was looking at Twitter, and there was a journalist I know who said he wants to start a campaign to saying that why have train drivers or conductors or whoever it is that make the announcement seem to have fallen in love with the sound of their own voices, that now when you're on a train it's a constant mind your bags or do this and report this and this next station's going to be XYZ and move to the front, move to the back. They seem to have become awfully vocal.
Remember that Grant Shapps, the transport minister, about 2 or 3 years ago said he was going to...
Stuck on the train. It doesn't move anymore.
We are stuck in a...
I must be in a time machine on a train track. I must be. I don't know what I'm doing.
You need a bit of an announcement.
I'm on a train track.
Staff on board doing their best in very difficult circumstances.
Simon, you're, as always, very diplomatic and very kind to everyone.
I'll see what else is on the TV now. Wonderful day today. Is it wonderful? Is it? Is it good? Is it a good day? Is it very good?
Now, the Prime Minister has hinted at ripping up the UK's international obligations to get Rwanda flights off the ground and stop the boats.
Stop the boats.
To the Sun newspaper,
stop the migrants, people.
Illegal migration is more important.
We don't want tent city in the UK.
Court, but he did sidestep a question on whether he would pledge to leave the ECHR in the Conservatives' election manifesto. Well, joining me now to speak more on this is the ECHR of that topic, is the international human rights lawyer, David Hay. Great fan of you, David, and you know certainly a
stop the boats. We don't want you anymore. We need more people in the country. But we can't have anybody else in. There's not enough room in the country. Stop the boats.
Good afternoon, Martin. I think you've got an increasingly desperate Rishi Sunak here, and if he genuinely thinks that he will be the Prime Minister and take us out of the ECHR, he's not just desperate; he's delusional. Even if you look at the process to come out of the ECHR in terms of time left, there isn't that. We don't have that time. We need, for example, one of the ways is a 6 months notice period. Even if we gave that now, there's going to be an election probably before that, and there's certainly no ability for him to do that in his party at the moment. So again,
I'm sick of these general elections. Who do you want to go for? Conservative, Labour?
And as a human rights lawyer, I'm not worried that he will be bringing us out of the ECHR anytime soon.
Okay, and David, I just want to read out a comment from a viewer which sums it up, and it will segue into a question for you to answer. Sue says this: other countries in Europe, for example, Italy and France, well, they don't take any notice of the ECHR if they decide to expel asylum seekers. Why should we? And David, doesn't that cut to the nub of this? The political will to defy the ECHR, to defy Strasbourg, if you like, is already there. We don't need to leave the ECHR. We just don't seem to have the guts to stand up to them.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Now, I obviously, as a human rights lawyer, don't want to leave the ECHR, but we have in the past ignored rulings, and we can do that in the future. That's not obviously a thing that, as a lawyer, you want to suggest to people ignore laws and break them. That's not something we should be doing. But you're quite right. I think there should be, if Sunak has strong authority, it's more of a political point really than a legal point. You can do that. Other European countries are all done it in the past. But I think that would
it's a bit cold outside today.
I think it's nothing more than a vote play. It's not going to go anywhere. It's not possible to leave the ACHR before the next general election, just in terms of existing laws.
So David, just to clarify, it is great. So there isn't time to do it anyway. We don't actually need to do it anyway. And so what is all of this? Do you think it's just electioneering, it's posturing, it's tough talking of somebody who seems to be running out of ideas?
Absolutely. I said it months ago. He's creating the monster under the bed to scare people, I think, to weaponise the burden of the ECHR. Kind of one of the better description, a kind of a Poundland version of Boris's Get Brexit Done. He's desperate for anything that will give people a reason to vote for Sunak and not vote for Starmer. And I think this is just hopeless.
And David, another point, if it were to proceed towards some sort of withdrawal from the ECHR, a referendum, whatever that may be, you'd expect the legal institution, the judges, the judiciary, the courts, the barristers, the charities, the entire machine, as we saw with Brexit, would surely launch into overdrive to stop this thing even happening anyway.
Absolutely, and if they use the process that's there by giving 6 months' notice, that's a quagmire of chaos, effectively. Because then what that does,
remote to my head. Look, balance. Look, I've got a remote to my head. Remote head, remote.
Suddenly being able, so they then have to re-legislate. So it's just more and more mess, more and more chaos, and it just won't happen. And the Prime Minister must know that.
Okay, so Dave, I'm going to ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely do you think it is that we're ever going to leave the ECHR anytime soon?
0. Anytime soon. I don't see it happening. I don't see the Conservative Party getting back in with a sufficient majority, if they get a majority or someone does, to bring us out. And even if they did, it's going to take a long time. There'll be, aside from the actual legislation point of that, there will be legal battles. And even if that did happen, it doesn't immediately solve the problem that we've got of people coming across the channel. So that none of those things are workable, and it's rather than waste time and money on that, let's actually look at things like processing and do things that could affect and have a positive impact on the problem we've got with illegal migration, rather than doing essentially this to win votes.
And David, finally, if the Labour Party were to get into power, and all the polls are suggesting a bigger landslide, we need to redefine the word landslide by the looks of it, bigger than 1997, the Labour Party will have absolutely no appetite whatsoever, will they, to take us out of the ECHR, so this moment will be completely past.
Absolutely, and if polls are to be believed, and that's a big if, then you're going to have a Labour government, perhaps, or with a very strong majority for a long time, and it's not on their radar to bring us out of the ECHR. Now, it's a human rights lawyer, and I said before, I do think we need to start looking at reforming certain definitions of human rights. But again, I don't see that's something the Labour Party will be doing either.
That's a shame. You couldn't stay in the stream. You got booted out the stream. Why are you in my stream? Oh, goodbye. I kicked you out. That's a shame. Happy. At least I can stream, unlike you. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Mong. So, yeah. Some people are just jealous in this world.
Now, Britain's automotive...
People get jealous of other people.
Now, farmers are calling for the government to give them a universal basic income, saying the post-Brexit agriculture subsidy scheme has left many of them worse off. Do farmers need more money from the state, or do we need to leave it up to the free market? Kelvin, where do you stand on this?
I'm never in favour of a kind of guarantee.
2-0 to Jerningham football match.
If I was going to give it a
2-0 to me.
Probably give it. Probably have to start thinking about Uber drivers as well. So I'm not in favour of that. The issue here is that there are, I think, only 100 signed up to this so far. And if anybody puts you a petition in front of you and says, "Are you in favour of receiving money for which you don't have to work or don't have to," then I'm afraid everybody signs for it. So I'm not. And the other aspect of this is that when you're in farming, you only get paid when the stuff comes out of the ground. So they're used to an enormously risky profession. None of them want to get out of it, right? Obviously, I recognise that they work damned hard. We need every piece of food.
Give the farmers more money.
We don't have to import.
FI4 farmers are calling for universal base income for farmers.
Worth quite a bit of money, and they themselves have a freedom to do what they want.
We don't want them to sell that land, though, do we? What have you seen the No Farmers, No Food campaign?
Farmer, right? And that may be what happens, that you can't have these small patchwork areas. You have to have large farming, and they have to be industrial farming.
Go on, Aaron. Where do you stand on this? I mean, the phrase universal basic income, are you comfortable with that? That does make my blood run a bit cold.
Well, it's a very left-wing idea, actually. You might be surprised. I'm not a supporter of UBI.
Okay.
Right.
I'm a big fan of universal basic services, access to the kind of welfare provision or public services that people are at least familiar with. You might not agree with it, but you recognise access to education, healthcare, etc.
Yeah.
Funded through progressive taxation.
Which we have that, though.
We have that, exactly. It's eroding in some places, it's growing in others, but people are familiar with that idea.
Yeah.
In terms of this,
triggered. Someone got triggered.
People aren't leaving farming
and got
really
booted.
If you speak to farmers, their kids, children don't want to do it. I mean, I know somebody who's the son of farmers. They will absolutely not take over that business because the returns are low, it's hard work, and the risk thing is such an important variable here. We never think about it, the rest of us, the rest of the world. If you speak to somebody like an Italian wine grower, they might have vines in Tuscany. You think, what a wonderful life. Wonderful. They're constantly panicking about the weather. It's not going to rain this week. It's going to be too hot that week. And they're constantly on edge. They're constantly anxious. Very difficult game. Not much money. And I think just from a perspective of food security, I don't know if I agree with this idea. I'm certainly open to it. And I think we should be growing as much food as possible. If this helps us get there, it's value for money, I'm all for it.
But that assessment is so bleak. If what you're saying is the next generation won't take over their farms, and or the farmers who are there now, who don't have any cash but know that they're sitting on a lot of land, which might be worth a lot of money for housing or even a field of solar panels, who's going to grow the food that we need to eat? What's plan B?
No, I mean, most of our country, I think it's 4/5 of the country now is basically farmland or something just slightly less than that, actually. But I don't worry about that, nor do I worry about farmers whose children don't want to go into it. I've heard that same argument about blood on the till in corner shops. Right, and actually there are as many corner shops today, if they can thrive anyway, as there ever were. So look, I do agree that the two words which will worry our country are food security. After all, having looked at Russia and the way that the Ukraine was considered the breadbasket of Europe, right? Yeah. And today, there was a kind of deal to allow this stuff to go out of the Ukraine, and the only reason they allow it is because there are starving Africans if they don't get hold of that grain. So it is a worry for ourselves, and we should do everything to encourage people to stay into farming. Short of, I just don't.
Why don't people start growing more in the UK then? Grow more fruit and vegetables, not like Scotland and Wales.
Talking about the state will be supporting our farmers. Shouldn't it just be that the supermarkets can pay the farmers a fairer price for their produce? Or maybe the supermarkets should be giving them a universal basic income or some sort of deal with the farmers whereby the supermarkets subsidise them.
Have you ever heard of those negotiations? They are at the supermarket. The guys, so people in charge of potatoes or the people in charge of this, that, and that, they are vile. Beyond vile. They turn around to say the potato guy and say, well, not only are we not going to pay you A, what you want, or B, what you had last year, what we're going to do now is we're now going to put an advert on television, and you'll be pleased to know that you are going to pay for that advert. And by the way, if you don't like it, we can get potatoes from anywhere in the world at no different price to you. It is a nightmare job. I knew a guy who actually was in the production side of cakes, right? He said, honestly, it was the biggest mistake he ever made in his life, because once you get onto their gravy train of what is their big companies, right, you stay with it. They treat you absolutely shockingly, which is why the government set up a board where independents can go and complain about supermarkets. The problem with doing that, as you might expect, is that the supermarkets say, really, you're going to do that to us, are you? Right. We don't expect, whether you win or you lose, don't expect to get any business from us. It is an absolute nightmare.
Right, isn't it? It's a nightmare for...
Well, there we go. That's how it is. That's how it is. That's how it is. I want to see what else is on here. I'm not running out of ideas today. No way.
Now, Britain's...
Right, so what else can we put on? Hardly anything on here.
First topic is this. Judges have been told to consider more lenient sentences for offenders from deprived or difficult backgrounds. And it comes from the Sentencing Council, who are responsible for advising judges and magistrates across the land. And the guidelines on difficult and or deprived backgrounds state that these factors include poverty, low educational attainment, experience of discrimination, and even insecure housing. But are these really valid reasons to get away with crimes? Well, I'm now joined by Batman, Christopher Hope, our political editor, in the studio in Westminster. Chris, great to have you back in the studio. Surely the concept of equality before the law is sacrosanct to any functioning democracy. The idea that people might get soft soaping if they come from a disadvantaged background, that runs contrary to what we all understand to be true and proper.
Of course, everyone's equal. Hi, Martin. Before the law, everyone is equal, but equally, you can allow for mitigating factors which may have meant that someone went down to a different, a more criminal path in their lives, and that's what we're looking at here. It's called the Sentencing Council. It sets strategy and guidance for judges to allow them to ensure that they're jailing the right people. The guidance that came out on Monday, made clear that some lenient sentences for offenders from deprived or difficult backgrounds should be allowed to understand why are they making those choices in their lives. They're looking at personal backgrounds, poverty, low educational attainment, experience of discrimination, insecure housing. Came in on Monday. The Alex Shaw, who's the Justice Secretary, clearly is not happy about it, but he can't do much about it. For me, it's the judges taking control of a situation where the jails in England and Wales are 98% full. They need to act to make sure that the jails aren't full to bursting, so they're doing their own ways by bringing their own guidance here. We do have a sentencing bill proposed in last November's King's speech that said that no one will be jailed for less than a year. We're going to grasp the nettle, to quote the government at the time. Well, it's been grasped and nothing's happened, because as things stand, as many as 40-odd Tory MPs, led by Suella Braverman, that's her again, she wants to amend those measures so it's much harder to release people and not jail them for less than a year. The problem is there aren't enough prison spaces, and for me, the judges are getting on with dealing with that crisis.
So people in prisons that got a life staying longer than people get released.
Look at this, and they'll be licking their lips to prove discrimination, even to concoct it or to give it some topspin. Experience of discrimination, straight away I was saying, okay, my client is from a BAME background, that'll tick a box. My client was on free school meals, that'll tick a box. For me, this represents a race to the bottom. It represents a quest for victimhood. It represents, I think, a thug's charter, because what if you live in the same neighbourhood as these people and you also experience the same disadvantages, but you're the one having your house robbed and you're seeing those people getting soft soaked by the judges? And does it mean that law-abiding, hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them?
This is guidance for judges. It's not for lawyers to try and use to support their case. Lawyers might be aware of the broad ballpark in terms of guidance and support, but it's up to judges to interpret what they see and weigh up the impact on maybe a victim living close to a thug, as you describe, or someone who's been in charge for mugging, whatever it might be, on trial for mugging. It's work out where they are. Is it appropriate to jail that person, put in new orders in to keep them away from them? It's a way, I think, of dealing with a problem of overcrowded jails. And it is also allowing maybe if you're from a black or Asian minority ethnic background, and why can't
can't you say, well, I've been arrested more than I might if I was white, and therefore that may have made me I was more angry with the police. It can have a bearing on how you're behaving. You don't agree with me?
No, I actually think that you're proving my point, but by allowing the kind of osmosis, the taking on board of oppression as a way of mitigating against a sentence.
It has happened, isn't it? I mean, some of this has happened, this discrimination against people has forced them down maybe some more violent path they might have taken if they hadn't been.
We could just build more jails, but we have to move on. And that topic is Rishi Sunak rattling his sabre, saying if the flights don't take off to Rwanda, which, by the way, you've still got a single pint of beer, which I think remains safe.
It's safe.
It remains safe. A single pint of beer. If that pint of beer were to touch the Prime Minister's lips, then he'd be calling the boys at the ECHR, threatening to pull out.
He doesn't drink, of course, so a pint of lemonade for him, pint of beer for me. It was a bet, wasn't it? We made the bet, I think, in September last year. In my defence, maybe the May election, it would have been safe. I'm not sure it's so safe for the November election. He told Sun newspaper viewers on YouTube last night, the Prime Minister, I do believe that border security and making sure that we can control illegal migration is more important than membership of our foreign court, because it's fundamental to our sovereignty as a country. The foreign court is European Court of Human Rights. That's the court with 40 or so judges, some of whom are British, which has ruled to stop people arriving illegally by boat being taken out of this country and flown to Rwanda. That battle starts again, I expect, after April 18th, when I expect the Rwanda bill to become a law, and then the judges, the courts, and the lawyers will get stuck into it.
Do you think this is kite flying? It's a nice bit of red meat to throw to the red wall. Oh, great, he's talking tough. It will horrify, of course, the Shire Tories. But is it just performative? Do you think there's any actual appetite?
Well, if you ask number 10 what they meant by it, I did you for GB News today, number 10 said that the PM is saying if it came to it, and the ECHR was a block on Rwanda, we would consider leaving.
Consider being the opposite word.
And consider, there's two conditionals in that sentence. So I think clearly he's saying perhaps what GB News viewers want to hear, and listeners and Sun readers and Sun viewers, but would he actually go and do that? Not everyone agrees with him. Jonathan Gullis, by the way, the deputy chairman of the party, he said that this means that Britain will quit the ECHR if that's what it takes to stop the small boats. Sunak tells Sun readers, clearly those on the right of the party are seeing this as a commitment, but that isn't maybe there if you talk to number 10.
And there's that small but important word, if.
And consider, quite right. So, clearly, were we to fight the election on ECHR withdrawal as a black and white issue, many Tories wouldn't be campaigning for him.
Superb, great stuff. Great to be back in the studio, Chopper, and we'll see you, of course, throughout the show.
There we go.
Well, joining me now is James Treadwell. He's a professor of criminology at Staffordshire University, and we're going to go back to our top story there. That is the reviewing of the Sentencing Council recommendations. James, what do you make of this? You probably just heard our conversation here. I believe it creates two tiers before the law. I think it creates the opportunity for phony oppression, for concocting stories to get off jail. What's your take?
I think there's some truth in that, Martin, and I think Christopher was right in many ways that what in effect we're having here, and it's odd from the Sentencing Council, which is supposed to largely remain sort of apolitical, that they're in effect giving the government a get out of jail free card here because the government haven't got enough jail places. In effect, this has been a crisis that's been coming for a very, very long time. The prison population is at a record high. We're running out of prison capacity. And quite simply, even if people deserve to go to jail and merit those sentences, we're having to find ways to release them early, to stop them from being put into prison custody. It's incredibly disingenuous to voters at the same time to continually say that, in effect, you're being tough on crime, because in all sorts of other areas, we're not being tough on crime at all. Let's also think about policing and the direction that policing is taken. The clear-up rates for crime are absolutely abysmal. There are activities and criminal activities that are largely now decriminalised, in effect, that where the law simply isn't enforced. And people, I think, are rightly going to see it and think, what on earth is going on in the criminal justice system? And for all the kind of rhetoric from both sides politically, there's very little effectively being done in terms of bringing forward solutions or looking at how we've got into the situation that we're in.
James, I think you absolutely got to the cusp of this in one sentence, giving the government a get-out-of-jail card. In fact, our political editor, Chris Hope, nodded profusely. He's got a question for you.
James Treadwell, I'm in the studio here with Martin. Just to ask you, to what extent do you think judges are going ahead of the politics? We've had this sentencing bill on ready to go since the King's speech in November. It's now stuck in Downing Street, as we understand it, because it's got dozens of Tory MPs trying to make it so you can't release criminals after you can jail them for less than a year. Are judges here going ahead of the politics? They're saying, let's get on with this. We can't jail everyone. Let's find reasons not to jail some criminals.
I think that message is perhaps being picked up a little bit in Crown Courts, although there is more restriction in Crown Courts. The interesting thing in some ways is if you look at what the government did, they gave magistrates, in particular, the power to sentence people to an extended period of prison custody, sentences up to 12 months, and gradually they've eroded those powers and taken them back as well. So, and you've got to remember that the majority of those who are processed through our criminal courts aren't processed through our Crown Courts. Crown Courts with judges tend to take the most serious offenders. There's a huge backlog in the Crown Courts as it is. Very often they're dealing with very, very serious offences where when it comes to conviction, there is no debate really about where individuals are going to go. Those who are going to be convicted in the Old Bailey today are by and large likely to go to prison custody. The interesting thing is what's happening in the magistrates' courts, and I think there the guidance from the Sentencing Council is much more likely to be taken on board and used. And in effect, though, those are the courts that deal with the vast majority, the vast tranche of criminal behaviour that we see, criminal damage to people's cars. Just before I came to do this interview, I walked around an affluent area in Birmingham. I saw 3 people riding down the street on motorbikes without motorcycle helmets. It happens so frequently and regularly nowadays because the roads aren't policed. And my final point would be, lots of people will say that there is there's no evidence deterrence works. But in effect, when you have a criminal justice system that isn't operating, that isn't passing any sort of sanction, where people have no fear of apprehension and prosecution, largely because it simply doesn't happen very frequently anymore. Or if it does, it's so delayed into the future. Then you see many of these kind of low-level crimes that blight communities, in effect, play out over and over again. And just one final thing to say, which Martin was absolutely right about and doesn't get said enough. The real impact of this is not felt in affluent middle-class communities. It's felt in the poorest and most impoverished communities, largely in urban city centres, where the victims of the offenders look exactly the same as the offenders themselves, but very often don't turn to crime. The communities that are blighted by antisocial behaviour are the poorest communities. They are the ones with the greatest disadvantages at the moment already, the ones that already suffer high levels of deprivation. But of course, not everybody in those communities, many of them lead very legitimate law-abiding lives, and they want to see something done about the individuals that blight their lives. And what's coming from on high, from the criminal justice system, doesn't seem to be effective, and that's creating political apathy, and people are losing faith.
Well, James, whatever coffee you're drinking, I'd love one of them. You've been absolutely bang on, mate. Fantastic stuff, James.
It is what it is. Madness, craziness.
Exceptional brushing every time with Philips Sonicare.
More bloody adverts again.
Creates microbubbles.
About toothbrushes.
Between the teeth, delivering the same brushing.
I can't stand adverts. I don't know about you guys and girls, ladies and gentlemen.
Philips Sonicare. There's always a way to make life better. Philips.
Now, judges have been told to consider more lenient sentences for offenders from deprived backgrounds. The Sentencing Council has, for the first time, explained the mitigating factors that include poverty, low educational attainment, experience of discrimination, and insecure housing.
Let's talk to former Metropolitan Police Detective Peter Blexley. Peter, good to see you this morning. Is it not right to look at mitigating factors like these?
Judges always have done, and they always will do. They do not need it laying out from a body, the Sentencing Council, formed in 2010, which, with this ridiculous set of guidelines, has just shown how unfit for purpose it is. Judges take these factors into account. This is deeply insulting to anybody who was born into poverty, who was not particularly academic, who went on to make a decent living, contributing to society. And quite frankly, it's just shown that this council that was established in 2010 is not fit for purpose and should be abolished forthwith.
And Peter, depending on whatever background you're from, whether that's upper class, whether you're born into poverty, you should know the difference between right and wrong, surely.
Absolutely, and we should all be judged as equals in the eyes of the law. But this just flies in the face of all that. And let's look at the broader picture here. In the UK, sadly, our streets are becoming increasingly lawless. We have an absolute epidemic of shoplifting and assaults on retail staff. There's massive increase in violent crime. Car crime is dreadful. Burglary, none of these are being investigated. Nobody's being caught. So on those occasions when people are arrested, charged, put in front of a court and convicted, what are people going to do now? They're simply going to say, I came from a tough background, life was hard for me, so please give me a lesser sentence. There are no deterrents these days, which is why, sadly, crime does pay.
You say this highlights the need to basically get rid of the sentencing council, but isn't it necessary, Peter? I mean, to provide those guidelines so that judges up and down the country are sentencing in a similar way?
It's these guidelines that have led to so many sentences that have had the public and the media up in arms in recent years. This body was only formed 14 years ago. It's not like it's cemented into the very heart and soul of our judiciary. And having been in many, many courts and in front of many, many judges, as a witness, I hasten to add, rather than a defendant, I've always erred on the side of trusting the wisdom of judges to come to their decisions. It is judges who hear all the facts of a case and not the sentencing council. So I think this kind of prescriptive instructions that are being handed down are damaging. They tie the hands of judges very often, and consequently, people do not receive the suitable punishments that they should.
Do you fear that this will excuse criminality?
Yes, and that's why it's so deeply insulting to people like me who came from a rather impoverished background, please forgive me, who came from a rather impoverished background, didn't achieve particularly well at school, and then went on to live a law-abiding life. It's so insulting to people to just say, well, if your start in life is difficult, then we'll understand if you go off and have a life of crime. Utterly insulting.
Peter, really good to see you this morning. Thanks very much indeed.
Well, there we go.
Let's move on to a new story now. Judges and magistrates, they can now hand out more lenient sentences than previously to people described as having, quote, a difficult or deprived background.
Now, there aren't many examples on the list, but poverty is included as an example of this mitigating factor. So are we getting soft on criminals? Well, Sir Philip Davies is a Conservative MP for Shipley, and he's here now. So, Philip, congratulations. I want to ask you, though, what do you think is going on here?
Thanks, Nana. Well, I mean, actually, this story probably...
What do you think is going on about
TV News is so important, because I suspect the BBC and Channel 4 and Sky News won't be alerting their viewers and listeners to this. But from today, as you said, judges and magistrates will be able to, not just able to, they'll be obliged to, really, give lower sentences to people from difficult and deprived backgrounds. That includes poverty, low educational attainment, negative experiences of authority, experience of being a looked after child, and people who've experienced discrimination. So in effect, what we're saying here, Nana, is that we'll be sending a burglar to jail for a lower sentence because they were in care as a toddler, or they had a run-in with teachers when they were 10 years old. I mean, it's a complete nonsense. I mean, first of all, it's patronising to people from poorer backgrounds that, they should be, it's no surprise that they're committing crimes compared to other people. I mean, what a load of patronising tosh that is.
But I mean, so it's worse than people might think. I mean, some people might think, well, you know, somebody who's poor, they've got in and done some shoplifting, that poverty should be taken into account when they're being sentenced. I mean, I don't think it should be, but I can understand why some people might think that. But somebody's poverty surely shouldn't be taken into account when they commit a rape or they commit a murder or anything like that. I mean, the whole point here is that the sentencing council are actually saying that you should be treated less favourably, irrespective of what the crime is.
Wow. So, Philip, I remember years ago working for my local paper and then latterly on the national newspapers, the amount of times and cases I'd been observing and reporting on where the judge or the magistrate had said, well, I could have given you this sentence, but I'll reduce it because you've got some kids to look after or you know, you had a rough childhood, I'll take that as mitigating circumstances. This isn't a new thing. It's been going on for, I'd argue, decades.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Ben. It's not entirely new in this, but this is codified. This is actually obliging judges and magistrates to do this. This is part of the sentencing council guidelines in the sense that if somebody doesn't do this in court, they're subject to an appeal, and presumably the criminal would win their appeal. You know, it makes it clear that somebody who is pregnant should be treated more favourably by the courts. You know, so in effect, what you're going to find, and you already get this to a certain extent, Ben, you're right, but it's going to happen more and more. People, women who commit a serious offence, for example, are going to deliberately get themselves pregnant. I've seen it happen already. In between committing the crime and being sentenced, because they know it will come with a lesser sentence. Now, that cannot be right. Judges and magistrates are told that they've got to act without fear or favour, affection or ill will. And this is actually making sure, I always thought we were equal before the law. And these new guidelines are making sure that we are anything but equal before the law. As far as I'm concerned, it's a complete outrage, and this unelected bunch of judges and do-gooders on the sentencing council need to be put back in their box.
Isn't the truth of this, and it is the elephant in the room, that they don't have enough prisons, they don't have enough space in prisons, and this is just an excuse. And also we've seen how the legal system, the Crown Prosecution Service has been operating. There's backlogs, there's delays, there's all sorts of things going on. Isn't this the reality and the truth of this, that they simply don't have enough prisons to put people in them?
Yeah, we don't have enough prisons. I agree with that, but that isn't the basis of these changes. These are changes based on principle, not based on a pragmatic view about the number of prison places. This is enshrining. This is not just going to be a temporary thing until we can build some more prisons. This is going to be it. This is going to be how we sentence people going on into the future. So yeah,
do you think they're doing that just to try and avoid putting people in prison, though, because they know they haven't got the space? So by finding a way of mitigating that, they can then justify it.
No, they're doing it because they don't want to send people to prison, but they don't want to send people to prison because the liberal judicial establishment don't believe in prison. That's basically it. They don't believe in prison. It's nothing to do with prison places. These people don't believe in sending people to prison, and they will find any way possible not to do so. I want more criminals sent to prison, but unfortunately, that is not a common view amongst the judicial establishment.
Yeah, it's a joke. I spoke to a knife crime campaigner over the weekend, and I said you could solve knife crime pretty much overnight by having a zero tolerance approach. Possession, 10 years, using it, 20 years, you know, straight to prison. And he said, well, we can't do that because we've only got 500 prison spaces.
Exactly.
It's like, well, what kind of country do you want to live in? Do you want to live in a crime-ridden hellhole that's going down the line of San Francisco where anything goes, or do you want to get your house in order?
Yeah, the thing is, though, Ben, the prison place situation is not a matter for judges. The judges should send people to prison or not send people to prison based on the evidence and based on the facts of the case. That is not their problem. The problem in terms of the prison places is one for the government to sort out. So that isn't an excuse. The fact of the matter is that judges don't like sending people to prison. Now, I contact my local police. And I said, if I wanted to reduce crime in my area by 50%, what would I do? And they would say, send the top 10 most prolific offenders to prison all at the same time. And if you want to reduce it by 80%, send the top 20 prolific offenders in the area to prison all at the same time. So we know that prison works. I mean, it's not sending people to prison that's the problem. It's letting them out. That's the problem. We do need to send more people to prison, but this is a massive step in the wrong direction.
Okay. All right. So, Philip, very quickly, in 5 words, what do you make of that bombshell poll saying the Tories are going to get 98 seats?
Well, we'll see. There's only one poll that matters. That's the one on election day. I mean, the thing is, I think there's a lot of people who haven't made their mind up. There's a lot of people who are really annoyed, really frustrated with the government. I am often one of those people too. But when it comes to an election, people have to think about do they really want Keir Starmer to have a 200 majority to inflict a load of woke socialism?
Well, it looks like that's what they want.
Well, let's see. When it comes to it, do people really want that? That's the question they got to answer.
Right. Thank you, Sir Philip. Appreciate your time with us.
Well,
thank you very much.
There we go. Right, where's this then?
People remembered Gaza's dead in different ways over the last 48 hours. In Rafah, this father wept over the body of one of his 2 children, killed in an Israeli airstrike. In Falmouth last night, a friend of James Henderson addressed a crowd, one of the British workers killed in an Israeli airstrike.
Such a beautiful, beautiful part of all of our lives.
And in Rafah, another friend of someone lost picks through the rubble of another strike, which includes food that came in aid packages.
America's provided some aid to us and lethal aid to Israel, humanitarian aid to us, military aid to them. It's like saying kill them, but kill them nicely.
And there lies the tension internationally. Thrown into
There are the people that have died there, as you can see.
7 World Central Kitchen workers.
3 British, Canadians,
Pressure is growing on
Australians.
the US and UK governments to suspend arms sales to Israel. Reports today that the drone used in the attack had components manufactured in Britain. At the same time, calls for more aid intensify because of the chilling effect Monday's attack has had on some aid delivery. The founder of WCK accused the IDF of targeting his staff systematically, something the Israelis refute.
So this was not just a bad luck situation where, we dropped the bomb in the wrong place, or no, this was over 1.5, 1.8 kilometers with a very defined humanitarian convoy that had signs in the top, in the roof, a very colorful logo that we are obviously very proud of, but that's very clear who we are and what we do.
The IDF said today that the result of their investigation into the incident had concluded and had been shared.
I kept my hand holding the phone for so long.
The government spokesperson described an adjustment in practices, but did not expound on what that meant.
Clearly something went wrong here. And as we learn more and the investigation reveals exactly what happened and the cause of what happened, we will certainly adjust our practices in the future to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
They always say that if it doesn't happen again, but it's happened several times. People getting blown up in aid workers for no reason.
Paused aid deliveries. What's striking, though, the number who have not. With almost 200 aid workers killed, NGOs have had to become used to the violence, and the bulk of the work is being done by people who live there.
Majority of the humanitarian workers are Gazans. They're the ones who are affected by the conflict themselves, and they, while being affected, are trying to deliver the much-needed humanitarian assistance on an ongoing basis.
President Biden spoke with Benjamin Netanyahu over the phone today, their first direct contact since Monday's airstrike. Netanyahu was told that future US support for Gaza depends on new steps to protect civilians and aid workers, and that an immediate ceasefire was essential. Today we spoke to a staffer of the State Department who recently resigned over the US's Gaza policy.
I do think there's increasing frustration with the ways in which Netanyahu continues to go against what President Biden has said he wants Israel to do, what he wants Netanyahu to do. My hope is that there's a realization that U.S. interests and Israeli and the interests of the Netanyahu government do not align here.
The next big test of US versus Israeli interests is not far away. What shape a ground offensive will take in Rafah, southern Gaza? And what will it mean for the 1 million plus people now living there?
Barack O'Brien, and in the last few minutes, Reuters has reported the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken adding his voice to the hardening line from America, warning if we don't see the changes from Israel that we need to see, there'll be changes to US policy. Well, earlier I spoke to Tess Ingram from UNICEF, who has spent today travelling up and down the Gaza Strip, and I asked her what conditions are like.
I'm in Rafah in the south of the Gaza Strip, and I can tell you that conditions have deteriorated since I was last year in the middle of January. I can see people are tired and hungry. They're telling me that they're kind of at the end of their rope in terms of resilience, and it's clear in terms of infrastructure as well that there's been lots more damage, higher levels of waste, poor sanitation, so things really are continuing to deteriorate here by the day.
And what is the situation with regard to food?
Food is limited. We're still not getting enough humanitarian aid in, and the very little aid that we are getting in, it's really difficult for us to distribute that across the Gaza Strip to the people that need it, particularly in the north, where we know that a famine can happen at any moment now. I was in a hospital today in the middle area in Deir Bala, and I met so many children who are malnourished, including one boy, Omar, who's 7, who'd come down from the north just 2 days ago. His grandmother said he'd been living on grass.
I mean, we've heard lots of Israeli spokespeople over the last few days saying this is a false narrative, that it's not true that people in Gaza are on the brink of starvation. From what you've seen, are people on the brink of starvation?
Yes. It honestly depends where you are, and the situation is worse the higher up you go through the Gaza Strip. So the middle area compared to Rafah, it's worse. North compared to the middle area, worse again. And I honestly was shocked today, Krishnan, at this hospital in the middle area by the number of children and adults that I saw who looked incredibly malnourished. And the head of paediatrics there told me that the number of cases he's admitting in general have gone up 3 times. And of those, 90% of the children that are being admitted have malnutrition.
So what is the problem in terms of getting the aid that is coming across the border out? I mean, Israel says there is more aid coming in now than there was before. So where is it?
Well, I don't agree that there's more aid coming in now than there was before. I just had a look at the numbers that we have on the trucks coming in. And since the beginning of March, we've averaged 156 trucks a day. Now, before the war, it was 500. The little aid that we do get in, we then have to take it through a war zone. These 2 crossings that we have are both in the south. So we then have to traverse the entire Gaza Strip. And as we saw with the tragic incident on Monday night where our colleagues were killed, it's not safe here. The systems that are meant to protect us are not functioning. And then on top of that, there's all sorts of logistical issues like damage to roads, crowded streets, telecommunications blackouts. It's really, really difficult.
And has that strike on the World Central Kitchen convoy now made a difference again this week? Has it reduced the amount of aid getting to people?
Well, World Central Kitchen was one of the main players distributing food here. They've paused their operations along with some other NGOs, so I'm sure that is going to have an impact. And of course, some of the food that they were going to unload turned around and went back in the opposite direction, which is just heartbreaking to see when we know kids are dying from malnutrition. We as the UN are staying and delivering, but, you know, again, it's not easy and we have to do so much more.
The numbers are quite mind-boggling, though. I mean, you know, World Central Kitchen, for example, said that there were hundreds of thousands of meals per day that were now cancelled. Now, does that mean that there are hundreds of thousands of people who are going hungry?
Yeah, that's right. The food and the aid is so scarce that a lot of people are relying on a meal a day. So if they're not getting that one meal from World Central Kitchen, or they're not able to get an aid delivery from WFP that contains flour to make bread, then they're probably not going to eat that day. And I've spoken to families that have told me that's the case. They're sharing maybe one tin of beans between, you know, 4 or 5 people.
Can I also just ask you about the sort of the attempts to get aid in through the sea? I mean, you know, we've heard this American idea of building sort of pontoon. You know, what difference are those operations likely to make? How long will they take to make a difference?
Well, some of them we've been told are more than 6 months away, and we just don't have 6 months to wait. The children of Gaza need food now, not in 6 months' time. But that aside, the most efficient way to get food in is through land routes. And there are other land routes that we can open that would take us straight into the north, 10 minutes away from where these kids are dying of malnutrition. So to us, that's the best option. And we're really advocating hard for these extra crossings to be open. There's no reason why we can't open one of them.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm joined now from Oslo by Jan Egeland, the Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council and a key diplomat in the Oslo process of the 1990s. The American language is really ratcheting up tonight, with the Secretary of State apparently saying if Israel doesn't change course, American policy will change. But America is still sending Israel weapons. So what does this language really mean?
Well, it would hopefully mean something if there is some teeth to the diplomacy finally. I do sense a change now. I hope this is a watershed moment. 6 international aid workers were killed after 200 Palestinian aid workers have been killed. And now it's sinking in capitals like Washington, London, Berlin, that they have had a diplomacy that has had an astounding impotence. They haven't been able even to help us to get aid to the children of Gaza, but they have been willing to provide the tools for this indiscriminate assault on the civilian population. I think things will change, but there has to be sanctions. There has to be much more teeth to the diplomacy.
What do you mean by sanctions? What do you want to see?
Well, I would like to see, for example, we will not provide you the tools for the destruction and bombs like the Americans seem to now be giving, which are indiscriminate. I mean, it's heavy bombs, taking down entire apartment houses and so on. We won't do that until you have a deconfliction system that the humanitarians can work on and with. We have access through many border crossings and end with these ridiculous airdrops, and also the very chaotic maritime route. There is a ceasefire ending the indiscriminate attacks, and there is also a start of some kind of a political process to end all of this.
Right, and having been, I know you were in Gaza as well recently. I mean, how can you get the aid moving? You know, it's clear that people are starving. How can you get it moving now in a safe way?
By opening up several road crossings. They're called Karni and Eres in the north. They are like 25 minutes by road to Gaza City, where people are in famine. They're not starving, they're in famine. There's no other way to describe it. By also, I would say, countries like UK and US, why haven't they organized their own convoys into Gaza? They can under international law. How come Israel is allowed to control all going in, even over the Egyptian Gaza border? International law says you have to enable enforced relief to people who are starving if there is a belligerent that is denying it.
Is that because the world has dehumanized the Palestinians?
I think there is an element of that. And I think there is also a large scale of hypocrisy here. I think the rest of the world is saying, how come it's so bad with Russian occupation in Ukraine and with Russian bombing of civilian targets and denying people electricity and water, when it seems to be acceptable in the Palestinian case? Even arms and political and other support has not been denied. So the moral authority of our main donors is also at stake here. I think things are changing. I sense a change now. I think this is a watershed moment. I see the discussion in London, in Washington, and even in Berlin now, saying enough is enough. Israel cannot continue as they have.
Jan Egeland, thank you very much indeed. Aisha.
Wow.
Thanks, Chris. Channel 4 News has been told that officials in the Department for Business and Trade have threatened to stop working over UK arms sales to Israel. It comes after the publication of a letter signed by over 600 lawyers warning that the UK could be failing its obligations under international law. Our senior political correspondent, Paul McNamara, is in Westminster. Paul.
Yes, these are officials, we understand, involved with the overseeing of the export of arms to Israel. Their fear that what they're being asked to do may break international law, and that under international law, ignorance is no defence. In the last few minutes, the head of bargaining at the PCS union, Paul O'Connor, has told Channel 4 News, quote, "We believe that the UK government has an obligation to do all it can to halt the onslaught. As it does not appear to be willing to do so, we are seriously considering taking legal action to prevent our members from being forced to carry out unlawful acts." They go on to add, "We do not take such cases lightly, and we only do so where we have reasonable prospect of winning." Important to add, the government have responded to this. They've said, quote, "We keep advice on Israel's adherence to international humanitarian law under review and will act in accordance with that advice. All export license applications are assessed on a case-by-case basis against the strategic export licensing criteria." But look, it's not just these officials that have an issue with arms sales to Israel at the moment. Three Supreme Court judges and 597 other of the most preeminent voices in the legal profession have an issue with it too. They've written to the Prime Minister saying that they want a ban on arms sale. We caught up with one of the senior barristers this afternoon. This is what he had to say.
We've called for a ban on arms sales because the arms could be used in acts of genocide in Palestine. The letter hasn't identified specific UK arms which have been used in the past, but the concern is that they may be used in future. And it's in order to try to prevent that that we say a ban is appropriate.
And is that what you believe is going on in Palestine now? A genocide. It's a very punchy word to be using.
It's a very punchy word and it has a very specific legal meaning. There is a serious risk of genocide. The UK is a party to the Genocide Convention, and that gives it certain obligations. And one of the obligations comes about where there's a serious risk of genocide. So it's quite specific words that are used to define what's going on. If there is a serious risk of genocide, then what the UK is required to do is to take all reasonable steps to try to avoid it.
The government is constantly receiving legal advice. Labour have asked for that legal advice to be made public. Do you want it to be made public?
This is, again, it's not something that appears in the letter, but personally, yes, I'd welcome that legal advice is made public. I'm sure the majority of the population would do. This is such an issue of public concern, national and international concern, then it calls for greater openness than there might normally be on the part of government.
Well, there we go. Anyway, I better end the video. Thank you for all joining me. I've done 1 hour on here. Hope you all enjoyed it, and hope to see you next video. Take it easy. Peace. See you later. Thank you for joining me.